What is up, Light Fam? It is David, your spiritual awakening coach, here to help you through your spiritual awakening. Ego death, dark night of the soul. Let's talk about it. If you've just had a spiritual awakening, maybe you're finding yourself in those painful throes of the dark night of the soul. You're researching the dark night of the soul, and you keep coming across this term, ego death. What the heck is that? Now, if you're new to spirituality, that term ego death can sound not only confusing, but scary, because it sounds like your ego is going to die and then you're going to be ego-less. And you're like, wait a minute, don't I need one of those? Yeah, you do. And that's not what's going to happen. So let's talk about what is going to happen. Let's replace ego death with identity death. It's the current identity and the old identity that are dying and making way for the new higher consciousness identity, more in alignment with the dominant frequency of source, which is love, and out of alignment with the polar opposite frequency, which is fear. And this is something that I don't see a lot of other channels really focus on. They kind of leave the new identity on the back burner and focus on the death of the current identity. So I like to paint the whole picture. Why don't we change ego death to ego death and rebirth? This is the thing. We're birthing a new identity. So think of a phoenix. Isn't the fire, which causes the ashes, which causes the phoenix to be birthed, isn't that fire painful? Yeah, it is, but without those ashes, we wouldn't have a phoenix. So if you identify with the phoenix, this is a great visualization tool that you can use. Anytime you find yourself stymied in that painful, anxious, fear-based, confusing dark night of the soul, think of yourself as that fiery phoenix rising out of the ashes of who you used to be, rising out of the ashes of that old unhealed trauma, rising out of the ashes of abandonment trauma, rising out of the ashes of people-pleasing, rising out of the ashes of chasing validation. You're the phoenix rising into that new identity of being self-validating, self-approving, spiritually sovereign. And this is why you can't destroy someone that has discovered their true identity through their own destruction. Let's dig a little bit deeper into ego death, dark night of the soul. Your ego creates an identity that's based off of certain core beliefs. These core beliefs are handed down to you by your primary caregivers, by man-made religion, by your socioeconomic status, circumstances, your environment. These are the core beliefs to which your ego attaches its identity. Now, when these core beliefs and paradigms are threatened, that is a threat to your ego's concept of self. When the ego's concept of self is threatened, it throws you into fight or flight in an attempt to preserve and validate those core beliefs that it holds so dear, which creates its identity. But here's what I want you to remember. You are not your ego. You have an ego, but you are not your ego. What does this mean? Well, it means that you can choose the core beliefs that you want to make up your identity. You can choose higher consciousness beliefs. You can choose core beliefs that are out of alignment with fear-based nonsense and more in alignment with higher consciousness, the dominant frequency of source, the love frequency, the gratitude frequency, the endless possibilities frequency. That can forge your new identity. What this does is it allows you to be one step removed from the ego, where you're not identifying as the ego. And then you allow the ego to go through its little identity crisis. The ego is just trying to find itself, much like a college student that takes a year off from college to travel the world to find themselves. Yeah, my ego, he's just trying to find himself. He'll be all right. Now, does that sound like a threat to survival? Of course not. So, you're not being pulled into the ego's anxiety game every time the ego has an existential identity crisis. This keeps you out of a fear-based, constricted frequency, because you can't expand into higher consciousness if you're in the frequency of fear, because fear is the opposite frequency of higher consciousness. Ego death, dark night of the soul. Have a caterpillar mindset. I am a perfect caterpillar, perfectly on my timeline, becoming a perfect butterfly. There's nothing wrong with me, same as there's nothing wrong with the caterpillar, just because it's not a butterfly. I understand that evolving into a butterfly can be painful and even scary. Change usually is. But I understand that this evolution is for my highest good. Moreover, I chose to become a butterfly for this particular incarnation before I decided to incarnate. Now, I wouldn't have made that decision unless I was 1,000% confident that I had the ability to accomplish said purpose. I made that decision before deciding to incarnate from the non-physical, before I had an ego to distort the truth about my ability and my true identity as source. So I trust the path that I have chosen, and I surrender control, the ego's favorite guilty pleasure, and trust the process. I love you guys. Namaste.